Just 6 weeks ago, I was just a regular kindergarten teacher living in a small apartment on the edge of Columbus, Ohio. My days were filled with kids' songs, messy crayon drawings on the classroom walls, and monthly bills I had to stretch every dollar to pay on time. But then, one phone call changed everything. In an instant, I wasn't just a teacher with a paycheck anymore. I became the heir to $27 million. Sounds like a dream, right? Except that moment turned my whole family into strangers. My name is Emma Collins, I'm 28. I grew up in a picture-perfect family, a dad who made it big in finance, a mom who showed up at every city fundraiser, and a younger brother who always seemed full of startup ideas. But behind the doors of that big red brick house was a coldness deeper than any Ohio winter I've ever known. The warmth of my childhood came from my grandparents. They raised me with love and steady values. I didn't realize back then that everything they taught me, from living simply to staying honest, was the reason they trusted me completely, not their own kids. The story I'm about to tell isn't just about inheriting money. It's about how dollars and cents reveal who people really are. And if you think you've seen a family fall apart over money, stay with me. What I went through will make you think twice. Whenever someone asks about my childhood, I usually smile and say I grew up in two completely different worlds. On one side was my parents' big red brick house in the suburbs of Columbus, where everything existed just to keep up appearances. On the other side was my grandparents' small farm out in Delaware County, where the smell of apple pie and the sound of wind through the cornfields are etched into my memory. My dad, Michael Collins, was so ambitious that every dinner conversation circled back to the stock market or his latest deals. He almost never asked me something as simple as, "How was school today, Emma?" My mom, Linda, lived for attention. She was busy with charity galas, cocktail parties at country clubs, and shopping trips to high-end malls. They were physically there, but emotionally absent. My younger brother, Ethan, 3 years younger than me, was always chasing million-dollar ideas but never finished anything. To my parents, Ethan was the golden child, while I was just the kindergarten teacher with a small paycheck. My grandparents' world was the exact opposite. George and Margaret Bennett lived in a 4-bedroom wooden house, surrounded by 3 acres of land with a vegetable garden, apple trees, and a big front porch. Every weekend I'd pack my backpack and stay there until Sunday night. Grandpa would take me out to the garden, show me how to plant pumpkin seeds, pull weeds, and patiently explain why the soil needed to rest after each harvest. Grandma taught me how to roll dough, slice apples thin, and sprinkle cinnamon before sliding the pie into the oven. The smell of fresh apple pie filling that little kitchen, that was the scent of my childhood. And they never missed a single milestone. From my elementary school spring plays to middle school soccer games, I could always spot them in the front row, waving and smiling. Meanwhile, my parents' seats were often empty. When I was younger, I used to wonder, am I just not important enough for them to care? That question grew inside me until I finally stopped hoping they'd show up. What struck me most about my grandparents wasn't just their love, but the way they lived. They had founded a trucking company back in the 70s, starting with nothing but an old pickup. Even when the business grew to hundreds of trucks and warehouses across the Midwest, Grandpa still drove a beat-up truck that was over 20 years old. Grandma still clipped coupons at Kroger and shopped clearance racks for clothes. When I asked why, they just laughed and said, "Money's just a tool, Emma. What really matters is how you use it to create something good." That belief often clashed with my dad's mindset. Michael thought his parents were old-fashioned and stingy. He wanted them to bankroll his big ventures, while they believed in hard work and saving. They paid for his college, helped with his first house, but when he demanded a high-level management role in the company without experience, they flat-out refused. From then on, their relationship never recovered. For my dad, their love and support never seemed enough. With me, though, they gave freedom. When I chose to become a preschool teacher, a low-paying job, but one that made me happy, they were the first to clap. I still remember Grandma hugging me and saying, "You're planting seeds for an entire generation." That line carried me through so many tough days in the classroom, even when my paycheck barely covered the basics. Looking back now, I see it clearly. I grew up with two families running side by side. On one side, my parents and brother, where love was replaced by expectations and self-interest. On the other side, my grandparents, who filled that emptiness with presence, with values, and with unconditional love. I had no idea back then that this very difference would shape everything, the day they were gone forever. That night, I was sitting at my little kitchen table, grading stacks of crayon-scribbled drawings, when the phone rang. I never imagined a random Tuesday night call could rip my whole world apart. The officer's voice was firm. A speeding car ran a red light and slammed straight into my grandparents' car on their way home from dinner. They were gone instantly. I remember freezing in place, the pen slipping from my hand and rolling across the tile floor. My head spun, like the whole apartment was turning upside down. Every sound faded, and all I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat. The funeral was a week later, held at a small church back in their hometown. February skies were gray, snowflakes drifted down, and the cold wrapped around us all. I sat in the front row, clutching the wool scarf Grandma had knitted for me in high school. Never in my life had I felt the world so empty. But what cut deeper than the freezing air was the hypocrisy in my own family. My dad argued with the funeral director about coffin prices. My mom walked around in a fancy fur coat, dabbing her eyes while making sure everyone noticed her. Ethan kept his eyes glued to his phone, not even looking up when the pastor spoke my grandparents' names. Aunt Carol, my dad's sister, sobbed loudly, but only when the camera turned her way. Watching it all broke my heart. My grandparents had spent their whole lives loving, raising, and sacrificing for us, and in their final moment, their own family treated the funeral like a stage. After the burial, I drove past their wooden house. Snow covered the porch, but the light by the front door was still on. Grandpa always set the timer for that lamp, so anyone coming home late would see a warm path waiting. I sat in my car, staring at that soft glow spilling across the snow, feeling like an invisible hand was squeezing my chest. Inside, every corner of that house still carried their warmth: the armchair where Grandpa read the paper, the faint smell of cinnamon in the kitchen. But now it was all just memory. I couldn't bring myself to walk in. Instead, I drove back to my tiny apartment, took time off from teaching, and drifted through days that felt like a blank void. I had no idea that just a few weeks later, a meeting at a lawyer's office would completely change my life and expose the true faces of the people I once called family. That morning, the sky was gray, almost like it mirrored how I felt. A light drizzle had just passed, leaving the air damp and cold. Downtown Columbus was wrapped in a thin layer of fog. I showed up at the office of Daniel Hayes, my grandparents' longtime lawyer, 15 minutes early. It was an old Victorian house turned into a law office, with dark wood-paneled walls and leather chairs. The air smelled like roasted coffee mixed with polished wood, and it made me feel both solemn and choked up. Daniel shook my hand firmly, his eyes behind metal-rimmed glasses filled with sadness. "Emma, I'm so sorry. Your grandparents were extraordinary people," he said softly, his voice trembling. "I'll miss George's chess games and Margaret's lemon pies she always brought to meetings." Before I could even answer, the glass door opened. My family walked in all at once, like an army. My dad, Michael, led the way in a tailored black coat, constantly checking his watch like his time was worth more than anyone else's. My mom, Linda, followed with her glittering designer purse, her face showing nothing but impatience. Ethan wore sunglasses indoors, his wrinkled shirt half tucked into his jeans. Aunt Carol and Uncle Steve came too, Carol still loud on the phone, Steve just trailing silently behind. Michael didn't bother to greet anyone. He just muttered, "Let's make this quick, Daniel. I've got more important things to do." The air grew heavy. I sat near Daniel, while my parents took the seats at the head of the table, like they were grabbing for control even here. Daniel opened his briefcase, adjusted his glasses, and began. "I, George Bennett, and I, Margaret Bennett, being of sound mind, hereby declare this will." The legal words dragged on, and I heard my dad's chair creak as he shifted. But then came the moment that froze the whole room. We leave our entire estate, including $8 million in cash, $12 million in investments, $5 million in real estate, and one-quarter ownership of Bennett Logistics, totaling about $27 million to our granddaughter, Emma Grace Collins. I went numb. My heart stopped for a beat. My ears rang until all I could hear was the sound of heavy breathing around me. My dad shot to his feet, his chair crashing backward.
What? Give me that.
He snatched the papers from Daniel's hand, scanning them wildly. My mom jumped in, her voice sharp. No way. $27 million to a preschool teacher? She can't manage that kind of money. This is a joke. Ethan slammed his hand on the table, his face red.
What about me?
I'm family too. I need funding for my startup. They can't just leave me out like this. Aunt Carol turned on me, her face twisted. Emma, what did you do? How did you trick them into giving you everything? I couldn't get a word out. My mind kept repeating the same two words, $27 million. I never even knew my grandparents had that kind of fortune. Daniel raised his hand. Please, everyone.
There's more.
He pulled out a remote and turned on the screen mounted to the wall. And then they appeared. My grandparents, sitting on the familiar living room sofa, the wool blanket draped behind them. My chest tightened, my eyes blurred. They looked like I had just had dinner with them yesterday. Grandpa spoke first. If you're watching this, it means we've passed. We want to make things clear so there's no misunderstanding. Grandma's voice followed, slow and steady. Michael, Carol, we love you, but we're deeply disappointed in the values you've chosen. For years, you've treated us like a bank, not like parents. We've watched you miss family moments again and again, chasing status or selfish gains. Grandpa added, this company wasn't built to show off wealth. It was built on sweat, integrity, and to provide stability for both family and employees. Emma's the only one who understands that. She visited us every week, never asked for anything, and chose teaching out of love, not money. That's why we're entrusting her with this legacy. The video went on for a few more minutes, talking about their dreams of scholarships and community projects they hoped I'd continue. When the screen finally went dark, all that was left was the sound of shallow, angry breathing. My dad roared. Ridiculous. They were losing their minds. I'll sue, and no court will uphold this nonsense. Daniel stayed calm. Michael, they passed mental evaluations by 3 independent doctors before signing. The records are right here.
It'll be very hard to contest.
My mom's tone shifted, suddenly sweet, as she turned toward me. Emma, honey, you know this isn't fair. That money belongs to the family. You'll share it with us, won't you? I stared down at the dark wood table, my throat tight. I couldn't answer. Every gaze on me felt like a knife. Daniel touched my hand gently and whispered, you don't have to decide anything today.
Take your time.
Here are the documents, the house keys, and the list of financial advisors. Think carefully. When the meeting ended, the room exploded into threats, curses, and angry stares. I walked out into the drizzle, clutching the thick folder against my chest. In the parking lot, my dad grabbed my arm, pulled me close, and hissed in my ear, this isn't over. 6 o'clock tonight. At the house. We'll settle this as a family. His voice cut like icy wind through my bones. I nodded without thinking, then watched them drive off in their luxury cars, leaving me standing there with my 10-year-old sedan. In that moment, I realized what should have been a gift had turned into the spark that would burn away whatever fragile bond one had left with my family. That night, I drove to my parents' red brick house with a knot in my stomach. Darkness had fallen, the porch light glowed bright, and melted snow had turned into icy puddles along the walkway. The 3-story mansion looked like a fortress, but to me, it had never felt safe. Inside, the whole family was already waiting in the over-decorated living room. The fireplace burned, but there was no warmth in the air. My dad stood beside it, holding a glass of scotch, his eyes cold and sharp. My mom sat in an expensive armchair, tense but smiling like she was about to negotiate with a client. Ethan sprawled on the sofa, feet on the table, eyes glued to his phone. Aunt Carol paced back and forth, while Uncle Steve stood by the window, avoiding everyone's gaze. My dad pointed to the chair across from him. "Sit down, Emma. We need to talk." I sat, trying to stay calm. He started with that familiar bargaining tone. "You know your grandparents made a mistake. They got confused and left everything to you. But family is what matters. Here's our offer. You sign everything over to me, I'll manage it. You get 10%. That's more than fair." I swallowed hard, my heart racing. 10%, nearly $3 million. Huge compared to my teacher's salary. But the way he said it, like I was just an employee getting a bonus, made my throat tighten. My mom jumped in, her voice sugary sweet. "You'll have enough to buy a new house, trade in that old car, live comfortably. And your father knows how to invest, so the money won't disappear. You don't need that heavy responsibility." Ethan added, annoyed. $3 million's plenty for a preschool teacher. I need at least $5 million for my new crypto platform. It's gonna blow up and make the family even richer. I let out a bitter laugh. Ethan had burned through our parents' money on ridiculous ventures apps that went nowhere, shady electronics schemes. But he still spoke like a misunderstood genius. Aunt Carol jumped in, eyes blazing. "The house should go to me and Steve. You don't need a big place like that. My kids deserve good schools. You need to think about them too." Suddenly the room turned into a noisy marketplace, everyone shouting over each other, carving up the money and property without once asking me what I wanted or what my grandparents had actually hoped for. When I stayed quiet, my mom switched tactics. Fake tears rolled down her cheeks. "Emma, you owe us. Who sent you to private school? Who paid for summer camp? Who gave you a roof over your head? And this is how you repay us? By keeping everything for yourself?" I bit my lip, fighting tears. Instead of love, they called everything they'd ever done for me an investment. My dad slammed his glass on the table, his voice a growl. "Enough. You're going to sign. If not, we'll sue. We'll drag out every detail, every visit, every word you said behind our backs. It'll get ugly, Emma. You can't handle that." The air felt thick, like there wasn't enough oxygen. I remembered something Grandpa used to say, "Nobody can take your dignity unless you hand it over." I took a deep breath and met my father's eyes.
No.
"I'm not signing. They trusted me for a reason. I won't betray them." The room exploded. My mom screamed about how ungrateful I was. Ethan cursed. Aunt Carol pretended to sob. My dad's face turned red as he stepped closer, jabbing a finger at me. "Then listen carefully. Either you sign and stay part of this family, or you walk away. You can't have both." I stood, my voice shaking but steady. "If that's the choice, then I choose to keep my promise to them." My dad gave a cold smile.
Fine.
"Then remember this. That apartment you live in, we own the building. Your lease ends tonight. You have 30 minutes to move out. Tomorrow morning the locks will be changed." My whole body went numb. 30 minutes. They were actually throwing me out. On autopilot, I packed clothes, papers, and a few essentials into bags. My childhood bedroom was full of memories, my diploma on the wall, my old ballet trophy, family photo albums. I couldn't take it all. I only grabbed the wool blanket Grandma had knitted and hugged it like the last piece of home. My dad stood at the door, arms crossed like a prison guard, making sure I didn't take what was mine. My mom was downstairs on the phone with the realtor, already talking about selling my grandparents' house. As I dragged my bags to the door, they lined up to see me off with cold stares. My mom gave one final line. "You'll regret this. Money won't keep you warm. Family will." I turned back and whispered, "I never lost my family. You're the ones who threw it away." The door slammed behind me. The February night cut like ice, wind stinging my face. I stood alone on the stone walkway, holding a few bags and the wool blanket. In that moment, I knew for sure I'd been erased from my own family. I drove away from that red brick house into the freezing night, my old sedan rattling down the road with no destination. Winter wind whistled through the cracks in the door, streetlights flashing past like blurred memories. I had nowhere to go. My apartment wasn't mine anymore. My family had cut me off. All I had left was a bag stuffed with clothes and Grandma's wool blanket. In the middle of my despair, I remembered the thick envelope lawyer Daniel Hayes had given me. Inside was a set of old keys with a wooden rabbit keychain I instantly recognized. Grandma's. They were the keys to my grandparents' house. When I turned onto the familiar country road, snow dusted the bare oak trees on both sides. Their wooden house appeared in the dark, the porch light glowing from the timer Grandpa had always set. I parked, sat there for a few minutes, my heart aching and desperate to step inside. Finally, with shaking hands, I slid the key in. The moment I opened the door, it hit me the scent of cinnamon, polished wood, and the faint lemon oil Grandma used. I turned on the light. The house lit up, but the silence was suffocating. I set my bag down on the wooden floor and wandered through the rooms like a ghost. Everything was just as it had been my last visit. The book I'd left half-read still on the nightstand. The folded sweater Grandma had knitted still draped over the chair. The next morning, I was sitting quietly in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. My heart jumped. At the door stood a sturdy, gray-haired man holding a baseball cap in his hands. "Hello," he said softly. "I'm Carlos Ramirez. I've taken care of the house and garden for your grandparents the past 15 years. I saw your car last night, so I came to see if you need help." His warm voice almost made me cry. I nodded, whispering, "Thank you, I honestly don't know where to start." Carlos laid a hand gently on my shoulder. "They told me, if anything ever happened, I was to be here for you." We sat in the kitchen with coffee, and he shared little stories I'd never heard before. Grandpa quietly paying hospital bills for his employees, Grandma sneaking bags of cookies into their cars during the holidays. I realized their love hadn't been just for me, it had spread through the whole community. A few hours later, Daniel arrived with a heavy folder and a serious look. "Your family has already contacted 3 different lawyers to contest the will," he said. "But your grandparents planned ahead. They left journals, evidence, even security footage from the new system. We have everything we need to defend their wishes." He led me into Grandma's study. On the shelves were leather-bound notebooks. Every page recorded details: my father's visits, his demands for money, the harsh words when they refused. In between were lines about me. "Emma came by today, brought homemade muffins. She never asks about money. She just wants to hear old stories." Tears streamed down my face as I read her soft handwriting. They hadn't just loved me, they had been quietly protecting me all along. By late afternoon, more people showed up at the porch. Dorothy Miller, their longtime housekeeper Sophia Reed, Grandpa's business partner, and Harold Johnson, their financial advisor. They brought food, documents, and words of comfort. Dorothy hugged me tight. "Sweetheart, Margaret always said you're the heart of this family. We're not going to let anyone hurt you." Sitting in that circle of people, I felt something strange but powerful. Blood relatives might have turned their backs, but my grandparents had left me another kind of family, a family bound by loyalty and respect. That night, after everyone left, I sat holding the keychain in my hand. And I finally understood. My grandparents hadn't just left me money. They'd given me a safety net. A circle of people who wouldn't let me face this alone. For the first time in days, I knew I wasn't by myself anymore. The next morning, I woke to pale winter sunlight slipping through the living room window. I hadn't even brushed my hair when my phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Tomorrow at 10 a.m., the whole family's coming. Don't try to block us. If you don't cooperate, things will get ugly." My hands shook. I showed the message to Daniel, the lawyer. He frowned, then said firmly, "We'll be ready. They think they're the only ones with weapons. But your grandparents prepared for this." That morning, the house turned into a little command center. Carlos checked the cameras. Dorothy worked in the kitchen, the sound of meat sizzling in a pan oddly clashing with the tension in the air. Sophia opened her laptop, organizing financial files. Harold laid thick folders neatly on the long wooden table. At exactly 9:45, the luxury cars started rolling up the dirt road. First, my dad's sleek black sedan. Then my mom's white SUV. After that, Aunt Carol and Uncle Steve's bright red convertible. And last, Ethan's blue sports coupe, its engine roaring like a dare. The doorbell rang over and over, followed by pounding fists. Carlos opened the door. My dad stormed in, eyes scanning the crowded room, surprise flashing across his face before it hardened. "This is family business. Who let all of you in here?" he barked. Before I could speak, the back door opened. 3 more people walked in: Judge Robert Henderson, Sheriff Maria Williams, and Advisor Thomas Jang, longtime friends of my grandparents. My father's face went pale. Judge Henderson adjusted his tie and spoke calmly. "I'm here at George and Margaret's request. They wanted independent witnesses for any disputes." My mom scoffed, trying to stay composed. "Ridiculous. This is just family stuff. We're here to take back what's ours." Sheriff Williams gave a cold smile. "I'm here as a friend. But if anyone tries to take something illegally, I'll have to do my job." The room went still, the air thick with silence. My heart pounded, but for the first time, I didn't feel alone. My dad stepped forward, pointing right at me. "Emma, you tricked them. You manipulated them. Today, this ends." Thomas opened his folder, voice clear and steady. "Manipulated? I have records of you trying to withdraw from their retirement account in 2016, the fake check in 2018, and the petition you filed to declare Margaret incompetent last year just because she wouldn't give Ethan money." My dad froze, his face burning red. "That's out of context." Sophia slid another file onto the table. "And here's the $200,000 loan you took from the company in 2012. Never repaid. I got the contract, your signature, and George's emails reminding you." Aunt Carol exploded, pointing at me. "You turn them against us. You're the traitor here." Judge Henderson cleared his throat, his voice sharp. "No, Carol. I read Margaret's journals. She wrote down every detail: how you neglected them, how you treated them like a bank. There was no manipulation. This was their choice." I stood frozen, my chest tight but my confidence growing. I remembered Grandma's words on those pages. "Emma came by, brought muffins. She never asks for money, just wants to hear stories." Those words now stood as my shield. My mom still wouldn't give in. Her voice was sharp as a blade. "We'll sue. That money can't belong to a girl living on a teacher's salary." Daniel stepped forward, handing each of them a thick envelope. "Inside you'll find everything: texts, emails, video recordings, bank reports. If you choose to sue, this all becomes public record. I suggest you think twice." Uncle Steve flipped through a few pages. His face drained of color. He tugged Carol's arm. "We're leaving. This isn't a fight we can win." But my dad stayed rooted in place, glaring at me, his voice low and venomous. "This isn't over." I drew in a breath, steadying myself. "Maybe not. But today, it ends with you exploiting them. They saw who you really are." The silence was crushing. One by one, my family retreated, their faces hard, their eyes full of hate. When the door finally slammed shut, Dorothy carried in a tray of steaming coffee, the warm smell filling the room. The sheriff gave me an encouraging smile. Judge Henderson rested a hand on my shoulder. "Emma, let them destroy themselves. Your parents may have lost the fortune, but you've held on to the most important thing: your grandparents' dignity and legacy." I nodded, tears blurring my vision. For the first time in weeks, I felt it deep inside. I wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. When the last door closed and the sound of my family's cars faded down the dirt road, the house fell into a strange kind of silence. One by one, everyone left, until it was just me sitting in the living room at the dark wooden table where my grandparents had played chess for years. I should have felt relieved. I had defended their wishes, with the law and loyal friends on my side. But instead of joy, all I felt was a vast emptiness in my chest. I wandered through the house. Grandpa's room still carried the faint smell of shaving cream. On Grandma's dresser, the empty perfume bottle she used was still standing there. I touched them, and the ache in my heart grew sharper. The very people who should have been standing beside me, my parents, my brother, my aunt, were the ones who tried to erase me from the family. Upstairs, I sank onto the bed, clutching the wool blanket Grandma had knitted. The soft stitches pressed against my face, pulling me back to nights when I lay in her arms listening to fairy tales. Now, in this wide, echoing house, there was no more laughter, no off-key whistling from Grandpa in the garden, no Grandma calling me down for apple pie. The tears came, and I couldn't stop them. They soaked into the blanket as I cried, not just for losing my grandparents, but for losing the last fragile hope that my family might change. This morning's confrontation had proved it. They never saw me as family, only as a walking wallet. And in that moment, victory felt bitter and hollow. I held a fortune in my hands, but I had no family left to share it with. In the days after that showdown, my grandparents' wooden house slowly became the place where I learned how to start over. At first, the silence pressed on me like a weight. But little by little, I began filling the emptiness with action. Daniel the lawyer, along with Sophia and Harold, guided me step by step through managing the estate. They never forced anything, just patiently explained, helping me understand that my grandparents hadn't left me a burden. They'd given me a tool to carry out their dreams. I remembered the video they left behind, where they spoke about using part of their wealth to support the community. So I got to work creating the Bennett Scholarship Fund. After endless meetings, paperwork, and help from the whole team, the fund was born. $10 million set aside for education. Full scholarships for struggling students, support for the arts, and training programs for future careers. Even with that kind of fortune, I went back to teaching preschool. People were shocked, some even laughed. With all that money, why not retire for life? Why stay in a classroom with little kids? But the answer was simple. That classroom was where I belonged. I started using my own money to make it better. New bookshelves packed with picture books, fresh crayons and drawing paper, warm coats waiting for kids who showed up in the freezing winter without one. I saw their faces light up when they got a brand new box of crayons, heard their laughter when they tried the smartboard for the first time. Those were the moments I knew I was walking the path my grandparents had hoped for me. The biggest turning point came when the scholarship fund awarded its very first grants. I'll never forget that day. A small ceremony at the local high school. 20 students called up by name. One of them made my eyes sting with tears: Maria Vasquez. Maria was brilliant, but came from an immigrant family barely scraping by. Her parents worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. She had nearly given up on college because of the cost. When her name was called for a full scholarship, she broke down crying, hands trembling as she held the letter. After the ceremony, she came to me, tears streaming. "Miss Collins, no one in my family has ever gone to college. Now I can go. And my younger siblings believe it's possible too. You've changed our future." I hugged her tight. In that moment, I saw my younger self in her, a child who just needed someone to believe. And now, I was the one passing that belief on to the next generation. The scholarships weren't the only thing. I opened my grandparents' house as a community space. With Carlos's help, we turned the basement into a gathering room for career workshops, cooking classes, even free tutoring for local kids. Dorothy still came to cook, filling the air with the same warm smells I'd grown up with. The house that once echoed with my lonely sobs now rang with laughter, voices, and music from Grandma's old piano. It came alive again, not because of money, but because of people. Sometimes my parents and Ethan still reached out, usually asking for loans. I always said no, kindly, but firmly. They never asked how I was, only if I could invest in them. I stopped hoping for love from them a long time ago. My family now was the circle of people my grandparents had left around me. Every Sunday night, I hosted dinner at the wooden house. Daniel, Sophia, Harold, Carlos and his family, Dorothy, even the neighbors all gathered around the table. I'd sit at the head, looking at the glowing faces in the candlelight, and the truth was clear. My grandparents had been right. They hadn't just left me money. They'd left me a community. A real family. One autumn morning, 6 months after my grandparents passed, I drove out to the small cemetery on the edge of town. The sky was clear blue, the cool wind brushing through rows of maple trees glowing bright red. In my hands was a bouquet of white chrysanthemums, the flowers Grandma Margaret loved to keep on the table every Thanksgiving. I sat down on the stone bench beside their graves, laid the flowers down, and gently touched the headstone with their names carved into it. In that quiet moment, memories flooded back. Grandpa George patiently teaching me how to tie a fishing line. Grandma Margaret smiling softly as she fixed my apron before I helped in the kitchen. Both of them clapping proudly at my clumsy little school plays. I whispered, "I'm trying to do things right." The scholarship fund has helped so many students reach college. The company's still running strong, the employees still share in the profits. And the house sits alive again, no longer silent. I know you'd be proud. A breeze stirred, golden leaves swirling before landing softly at my feet. I closed my eyes, and for a split second, I swore I heard her voice. "Sweet girl, you did right." Walking back to the car, I didn't feel the same heavy weight I had in the beginning. I understood now I hadn't just inherited money. I'd inherited a promise. A promise to live with kindness and to hold on to the values my grandparents worked so hard to build. In the months that followed, I kept teaching, kept fundraising, kept strengthening the community. My parents and Ethan still tried to reach out sometimes, but I had learned to set boundaries. I no longer hoped they would change. I had found a new kind of family, the people who chose to stay, not for gain, but for love. And as I share this story with you, I don't want the number $27 million to be the thing you remember. I want you to remember that money doesn't create who we are. It only reveals it. My grandparents believed I would use wealth as a tool, not as a crown to flaunt. And that belief has changed my life. So I'll leave you with something simple, but true. Family isn't always blood. Family is where love and respect live, and where people choose to walk with you, whether there's something to gain or not.